One. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam Deep Dive Conversations series. And today we've got a fascinating topic of creativity. So I wonder how creative we're going to be about that. Alison, brilliant to have you here with us. And Alison's going to give us a kind of introduction into the topic of creativity shortly. But before we do that, I'd just like to invite the other guests here today to share who the most creative person you know is. And that can either be you know them personally or you know of them, and why they are the first person that comes to mind. And anybody who's ready, feel free to start.
I'll go first then.
Great, thanks, Betty.
Um, like I said, it's a very difficult question. Um, my my way of looking at creativity is maybe slightly funny because I think everybody's creative and in their own different way. So to me, my dad was very creative in the way he used to organize everything. So I find that as a form of creativity. But if you were to ask me somebody whose creativity I get blown away by, or when I see kind of that, I get blown away by, I would say I mostly it's artists, or mostly painters, and mostly impressionists. So I have like a very funny range of ways of looking at it. Yeah, so I think that if you were to pick one, I would say Monet. I really like the artwork that comes from him. But then I'm a big fan of Van Gogh, so yeah, make a pick on that one.
Okay, so that's a probably, I think I'd describe that as quite a traditional start, Maddie, really. Artist and those names, I mean, big ones. So what about you, Francesca?
Well, I'm laughing because my first thought was my husband. I call I call him my husband, and I hope he doesn't see this because he's about to get some compliments. But he he's incredibly like creative life force, like can grow anything, fix anything, make anything, sew anything. When the kids did Odyssey of the Mind, do you all have that program in your schools? It's a sort of a creative props and plays, and you have to think outside the box, and the kids go and do stuff on stage. And and they're supposed to do their own props. He made such exquisite props for them that they were like practically disbarred. They were like, there's no 10-year-old that's making these helmets and these outfits. Anyway, I think creativity is all of it, right? The cook, if you could, he could cooks. I don't cook. He cooks. He does everything creatively. Um, and so anyway, he knows how to do a lot of stuff. That's it for me. And then one of my besties is an artist, but she just focuses on one thing, which is gorgeous. But I think creativity is like big and sweeping.
Okay. And Alison, what about you? Anybody come to mind immediately?
Yeah, lots of different people, I suppose. I didn't think about artists initially. I thought of a lady who I do work with who's an organization development consultant called Catherine Woods, and she runs an amazing OD consultancy called Meeting Magic. And the reason that I think she's creative is because of the creativity she brings into the way that she does work with people.
Mm.
And when you do a lot of work in groups and with team dynamics, etc., which Catherine does, and she's done a lot of work supporting myself and my teams over the years, she just is so careful about how she engages with the human dynamic and so creative in coming up with ideas for how to engender the right conversations, how to get new thoughts out of people, how to create space for people to speak up and be in the moment. And and in corporate settings, that's actually quite difficult. It's surprisingly difficult to get that right. So I thought of her. Then I thought of Bono, just because I think that the music of U2 is just amazing and has endured over the years. And then when I was listening to Maddie, you talk about artists, Georgia O'Keeffe came to mind, because she just has this ability to use light and objects in such a different way, with such a different perspective. And I think about perspective and creativity a lot, and how we can be creative by bringing new perspectives to the same things or different things, etc. So yeah, lots of different people. And it's funny because I immediately started thinking to myself, well, am I actually creative? I wonder. And I like to think of myself as a creative person, but maybe I have a lot of room to keep growing in that space. So
It's
fun
funny how
reflection.
it's funny how the brain works, isn't it? Because as I was asking the question, I suppose I think the process was, Alan, you don't have a musical bone in your body, and so the artists or creative people that I really admire are musicians. You know, how they read music is beyond me for us, you know, just to begin with. So then I was thinking, well, David Bowie and Madonna, those two artists have reinvented themselves through their careers over multiple decades, and that takes a lot of creativity. So I was set on that. But then, Alison, you said something about how creativity is about being able to take different perspectives. And when you said that, Yoko Ono came to mind. And I went to see an exhibition of her work recently, and one of her art projects was, I might get the detail of this wrong, but I think she broke a glass jar and gave fragments to different people in the audience and suggested that they might like to come back in 10 years to rebuild the jar.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, how does anybody think like that? You know, it's
Yeah.
just so out there. So that different perspectives thing, I think you've nailed it there. And maybe that's a good time, Alison, to get into your kind of introduction for us to get us into the topic.
Yeah. So, gosh, it's such a big topic, isn't it? I mean, maybe by way of introduction, I can just share a little bit about why this topic is important to me personally and in the work that I do. So I am the executive director of the BIC Foundation, so the corporate foundation coming from the pen, shaver, lighter company. And we have, since 2021, been focused on bringing creativity into and at the heart of all of the programs that we fund. So we find and we fund not-for-profit organizations that are in the space of providing access to quality education to underserved kids and youth around the world. And we started focusing on creativity in 2021 because, as the relatively new executive director, I did a fair bit of research around education systems and what was needing to change in education systems. And many researchers and policy institutions and research organizations were saying that the skills that the kids need to be learning for tomorrow, for dealing and becoming leaders and people in the world for tomorrow, the skills need to change. And one of the skills that is critical is the skill of creativity. And so the question you then say is, well, what does that mean? And what does that actually encompass? And so the reason I'm interested in this topic is because, number one, in the work I do with the foundation, I really do think that our education systems need to change and that we need to focus more on creativity in education, both in the way that we are educating our young people and in the topic of how do we help to bring creativity into the classroom and how do we help people to innovate and create novel things, because the chaos that we're seeing today in the world, the problems are not going to be solved by the solutions of yesteryear. We're going to need new thinking. We're going to need creativity. We're going to need innovation. And it's a way of operating in your brain. It's a way of bringing new perspective. It's a way of coming into the world that is different than the historical rote learning or the more didactic learning that many of us, certainly myself, grew up with. So I'm passionate about it in education. I've also personally been blessed to grow up in, I think, a very great education process, meaning when I grew up in the UK as a kid, part of the time I was in Wales. And at that time, the schools were funded to give free music lessons. So back to your music point, Alan, I learned the recorder, and then I was given a cello, and I learned the cello, and then I moved systems, and I learned the flute, and I was singing in Eisteddfods, and then I was learning the piano. So there was a lot of what you would call non-core curriculum that was made available to me in the public school system in the UK. And I personally think I really benefited from that, including the arts lessons and the arts programming. And I know that now, fast forward, I'm going to be 60 this year, so fast forward many, many years, I still go back to those great kind of feelings of how did I connect with music from when I was a young person? How do I connect with art in my art practices? How do I connect with nature? And how do I therefore try and bring new perspectives into the work that I'm doing, and this focus on creativity? So I don't know that I would call myself a zealot. I'm certainly not an expert, but I'm just convinced that the more we can bring creativity into our collective lives, and very much in the lives of our young people as we're supporting them as they grow in the world, then I think we're all going to be better off. And I think one other thing, just to close on, there is something to me about creativity and inclusivity, and I'm not quite sure, does one preclude the other, or does one, like, which comes first? I don't know, but there's something about when you're being creative, you have an open mindset, and when you have an open mindset, you're going to have a more inclusive mindset, and that's also something from a values perspective that is near and dear to my heart. So Alan, does that help set it up for a good conversation?
We'll see. I think so. And I've got a question for us to start with, and I'll just explain where this came from. I was doing some values work with an organization, helping them to translate their stated values into concrete behaviors of their employees. And one of their values was actually, or is, creativity. And in one of the working sessions, I said to this small group, so what do you actually do to stimulate creativity? And they said, well, what do you mean? And I was, well, unless you protect time for it, and unless you put things in place to encourage it, why would you think that it's going to just happen? And there does seem to be this thing about is a perception that creativity just happens. Is that the case? I'm not so sure. So my first question for us to play with is, what sort of environment suppresses and closes down all forms of creativity?
Well, do you want me to go, Anne, or maybe Maddie and Francesca?
Maybe Francesca or Maddie to start, and then we'll all join in.
I say, from a teaching background, when you suppress questioning, it, in my opinion, stops creativity. So when you don't have like an open field of like, yeah, this is like, if you don't let other people question or ask questions or answer like in an open frame, I think it tends to suppress creativity, because then you can't look at the bigger picture or look at it in your perspective. Going back to what Alison said, changing your vision point, I suppose, as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. And also just opportunity. If you don't have an opportunity, then you don't have access. I listened to this young man on a podcast. Just he went to college, but he lived in poverty, got some opportunities. Now he's in college getting his master's. He's an amazing person. But one thing he said in the podcast that really uh resonated or just made my heart feel was he said, when you grow up poor or whatever, fill in the blank, and you ask, can I have this or can I do this? And the answer is no, you actually stop asking.
Mm.
So that can be fill in the blank, right? Poor or just not access or whatever. Um, you lose the opportunity to think that you can have space, that you can learn, that you just forget, you just think you can't.
Yeah, I totally agree. For me, what comes up is this idea of power over or patriarchal or judgment environments. And what I mean by that is anything that cuts into the confidence of an individual. Um, because to be creative, you have to be able to experiment, you have to be able to play, you have to be able to sort of spitball and brainstorm and think through different things. And I know even in my own artwork, I hold on to sometimes the outcome too much too quickly in the process of making the art. And therefore, sometimes I don't even start because I'm prejudging the outcome. Um, and I've worked in environments and I've been in teams and I've been with people where the power of authority, and we have hierarchies in any organization, but the power of authority can be very, very easily misused in overt ways and in covert ways. And it's not even so much about, I'm going to tell you no, but it can be about your body language and how you look at somebody and how you show up and the kind of quizzical look that you might look on your face when somebody says something in a conversation. So yeah, it can be unfortunately very easy to suppress creativity, both intentionally and unintentionally.
Mm. And I've had the benefit of listening to three people, so that's probably given me a few more ideas. So just some words, maybe a few explanations as well, but an environment of fear
Mm.
for me will close down any creativity. Um, Alison, to your point about diversity earlier, a one view and sameness, that
Mm.
Yeah.
kind of closes down creativity. Um, an environment where perfection is honored or where success is demanded, so mistakes are not allowed, appreciated, encouraged. And then finally, I suppose coming round circle to the explanation of where this question came from, when your time is completely filled with stuff to do. So just some additions to add to what you guys have said already. So when you think about the whole of what we've just talked about, let's just flip that now. And what comes to mind in terms of what you can do to create an environment that helps creativity to flourish?
I'm gonna go first on this one. It's gonna sound funny, but so I teach photography, and I give my example of one of the pictures I took, which was a complete mistake. And when I came to editing the pictures, I really liked my mistake. And the mistake was that I had long shutter on it. I exposed the picture for way longer, and it looked like as if it was a oil painting or a impressionist painting rather than an actual picture. But so I edited the image and I kept it on my save folder, but I didn't actually show it to the person I actually took the pictures of. And afterwards, I put it up on my back then we didn't have Instagram, so I'm like that showcases age, doesn't it? So yeah, put it up on my website, and she was like, is this my wedding's picture? I'm like, yeah, it is. And she goes, why didn't you show it to me? I'm like, because it's not, I could be anybody's wedding picture. It's super colorful. Nobody can see anybody's face there. Like I could just, it's just an impressionist kind of look. She's like, oh no, I want it. So I take that picture as an example, and I show it to my students when I say, here's your brief, and this is what you're supposed to do for an assignment. And I say, like, be happy and be all right with making mistakes. Because if you don't make mistakes, you can't have happy accidents. And sometimes happy accidents are what actually will get you to look at the same thing, but look at it differently. So yeah, so creating that environment where you can say, oh, I had a bit of a happy accident.
Yeah, I love that. I think the environment question is so critical. I recently reorganized my space next door, which is where I do my artwork, and it's prompted me to just feel like I have space in my head. I mean, the physical space gives me space in my head. And so for me, environment and time, as you were saying, Alan, is so critical. And yet at the same time, you don't need a lot of time and space. So if you look at some of the learnings from, I am totally forgetting the name of the lady who wrote a fabulous book that I'm also forgetting, but her point is, she's got Julia Cameron. She wrote The Morning Pages and The Artist's Way, etc. Or she wrote about the morning pages. And what she would say is that actually, you know, there is a discipline in creativity, which is kind of weird, because when you think about creativity, you think about discipline. So maybe what I'm saying is, create in your environment the discipline, whether it's space or time or whatever, to be able to create space for your creativity to come to the fore. Not just for yourself, but for others as well. Back to the point of, how do you interact with others to create safe spaces for creativity to come to the fore?
Yeah, I keep thinking about, I have this belief about creativity that I don't know is right. It's just mine. And it's like, we're all given, in my opinion, like we're all given certain gifts. Like my best friend can speak four languages like nothing. I was in French from like fourth grade to college. I could not converse with you in French. It wasn't my gift. Right. But I love writing, and I've always been a writer. So I feel like that was my gift or whatever. Or like someone sits next to a piano and they play, and it's like, and recently, just quickly, I was at a judge at a high school, and there were two young men, both 18. They both decided their project would be to learn the electric guitar. They had the same amount of time, the same amount of hours. One was just terrible. One is now in a band. And it wasn't because they didn't both try. It was because one had a gift, like could read the music, could hear the music that the other young man didn't have. And so I guess I'm saying all that to say access. Like if you get, you can try all your hats on to see, like, Maddie's clearly great at photography. I'm not very good at it. I've tried it. Like I've taken the class, right? But some things I'm very good at. It just depends. So I'm all that to say access for me.
Can I
What?
add something?
Yeah.
I don't know how everybody else feels about this, but I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm not creative."
Mm,
And they say it at such a young age as well. So I'd be teaching like a 15, 16-year-old and be like, "Oh, I'm not creative." Well, who told you that? And is normally my question. And they go like, "Oh no, because I can't paint, I can't draw." Because people somehow take creativity to only be painting and drawing. And I
right.
was like, "Well, it isn't just painting and drawing." And they'd go like, "Well, what do you mean? It is. Clearly all of the artists are creative." I'm like, no, an architect is creative, an engineer is creative. And then I'm like, well, you wouldn't have made it into space, and that's also creative. And so creativity isn't a box that somehow we've decided to put it in, which falls under the category of art. And so yeah, so I normally have to, when I say this, when I say it, I've always feel that we tend to put it in a box. And I don't know at what age we decide to put it in a box, but we put it in a box and then go like, oh, I'm not creative because I'm not artistic. Because they look at one stem of it and kind of, I think, so when you say like, maybe making that environment, again, going back to making that environment inclusive enough, open enough for everybody to go like, oh, it might not be good at something, but I can be good at this. And that is also a form of creativity. Because I was saying like, if you saw that my dad could write a book about how to fold stuff into the smallest of things in the most compact of ways, that if you saw his suitcase, you could chuck it from a mountain and it will still be 100% the same way he packed it. And it is an amazing thing that he can do that. I can't. So I sat down with him. I'm like, can you teach me all these folds that you do? And there are different folds for every single thing. Every single piece of fabric has a different fold. And they stay intact, no matter if you wanted to use them as a frisbee. So in my opinion, that is creativity, because I couldn't look at a piece of clothing the same way he looks at it and folds it. Kind of partly comes from being military, but yeah, but it is a form of it. And I think that's also creativity. Maybe my understanding of creativity is wrong.
No, I totally agree with you. I think that, look, I think that creativity is problem solving. I think creativity is the creation of anything new. I think creativity is, speaking your own truth. I mean, I don't subscribe to, I don't subscribe to the fact that we often, as adults in particular, and even as young people, we judge as soon as we do something. And so, Alan started the conversation by saying, I don't have a musical bone in my body, or maybe that's my interpretation of his language. Well, he's already judged that he's not musical, but yet what is music? It's simply the creation of different noises and sounds together. So I could probably go through an exercise with Alan and we could create music together. And therefore I would say, Alan, you are musical, right? Same as the gifts piece, Francesca, that you're talking about. So, the question of art, I mean, there are many, many ways to make marks on paper that therefore produces art, and it doesn't even need to look like anything. So I really feel that, and this is why I'm so passionate about it in education with young people, is that we move people into the right and the wrong judgment space so quickly that we suppress the creativity. And we don't bring forward the confidence, because the happiest and the most successful people, and I'm not talking about success in terms of money or what have you, but they are the ones that have the confidence and they're just at ease in their own skin. So, maybe creativity is just about being at ease in your own skin and having the confidence to put yourself out there in the world in whatever shape or form that looks like.
Alison, you reminded me of an experience at school. So I must have been maybe 13, something like that. And it wasn't even an art lesson, but the homework that we were given was to copy a picture from a book. I think it was geography, and it was about the local dockyard. So I was brought up in Plymouth in the southwest of the country. Now, I wasn't from a very privileged background, so we didn't have paint materials, we didn't have felt tips, none of that. So when I get home, I'm thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? How am I going to draw a picture from the book? So in the end, I decided that I was going to create as much contrast as I could with a pencil by pressing hard or not, and then using the side of it and all the rest, and copied a picture of what looked like steel vaults or containers of some sort, lots of pipes, that sort of thing. And so I remember taking it in and the teacher walking amongst the desks, and he stopped at mine and he said, Alan, that's amazing. What gave you the inspiration to do this just in pencil? And I couldn't tell him. I just said, I don't know, it just came to me. But it is this thing around, whilst we were talking earlier about giving ourselves the space for creativity, there's actually also something about, I suppose it touches the discipline thing that we were talking about, but also sometimes constraints can actually increase our creativity rather
Yeah.
than, like photography, Maddie, I sometimes deliberately go out just with one lens rather than a selection of lenses because it'll force me to do something a bit more creative. So where am I going with this? So I wanted to tell that story, but then what about this contradiction between openness and space for creativity versus constraints? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on
Mm.
that.
Well, funnily enough, I think you're right. Constraints can make for even more creativity. I mean, if you look at some of the technological solutions that happen in some of the more underdeveloped parts of the world, there's the examples of the guy that has no resources and he creates the windmill that is, out of basically broken bits of whatever that he's managed to find in the land around his farm, and then that goes on to create innovation in the way that that windmill was created, and it becomes a sustainable way of creating electricity for his local environment. I forget the reference. I'll have to find it and send it to you, but it's a beautiful story because his inspiration was born of the constraint of not having electricity, and yet he created a new solution with very, very limited resources. And funnily enough, even in pure art, there's the classic training of values and only looking at values, and to your point, using pencils and stripping away complexity can, I think, very often bring forward a solution or a piece of work, whether it's art or music or whatever, that is in its simplicity incredibly beautiful. So maybe there is something to be said that creativity can be and is often born from constraint and simplicity, therefore, because we strip away everything and we come to the essence. I don't know.
Hmm.
Francesca, what's in your head at the minute?
Well, I was just thinking like those, starving artist. It's like sort of can be a cliche, because we don't often honor art and creativity. But I also was thinking of J.K. Rowling and how she had nothing and she did the whole Harry Potter, right, from a cafe on Social Security or whatever you call that.
Yeah.
And I just was thinking about times in my life when I was broke and I had to just really hustle and be as creative. I mean, still, I'm always trying to be as creative as possible. And um, yeah, it's both, right? And then let's face it, I'm going to make a generalization, but people I know who are really in the dough and don't have a passion or a mission or a purpose, they're not really doing anything that I can tell. So I always feel like you need a little tension. You need some friction. You need some you need to be on the edge a little teeny bit to make something creative or
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I this isn't going to sound like it at the beginning, but I can assure you it is. I've just come back from the south of France. I went with my youngest son to celebrate his birthday. He is very keen on tennis, so what we did was went to the Monte Carlo Masters tournament for a day, and then we did some walking and nice meals. But anyway, we're at the tennis in this very fancy club, and Monaco is an amazing place. You're walking down the street, and around the corner comes a Lamborghini, followed by a Porsche, followed by a McLaren, followed by, and you're thinking, what is going on here? So we're sitting there on the side of the court, and I remember saying to Sam, Oh, he said, this is just amazing to be here. It looks wonderful with the cliffs in the background and blue sky. And I said to him, does how would you compare this to what it means to you now versus if you were one of these other people with the fancy cars and all the rest of it, and this is how you spent all of your time? And we had this really interesting discussion about the relative value of this, Francesca. And it's to your point that, if it just happens, what's the point?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
remember just recently I met this woman who has a huge house and she said, I'm miserable. And I was looking around and I'm like, you're miserable in this? You know what I mean? Like, what the heck? Like, I think the tension of your life helps you really express yourself and appreciate. And anyway, yeah, to your point, Alan, I get it, right? You just take it for granted, or like what do what fancy dress are you going to wear or whatever?
Mm.
To add that to that, it's gonna sound funny, but so I've moved around a lot. My dad was in the army, so I moved around a lot with him, then got married to somebody who likes moving around equally. Wasn't my choice, this just happened. And so I do enjoy the moving around as well. It might sound a bit funny, but I do actually enjoy it because I get to discover a new place. I get to, make new friends. And because I've done it that many times, I suppose at a younger age, you get very good at that skill of setting in within a place. And, it takes me 2 days to remember which switch does what. And literally, I will have it down by the second day. I'll know exactly what turns on what and turns off what. But that wasn't the start. That's not how it obviously started off. I guess I did struggle when it started off. But I also appreciate when I've stayed in one place for very long and grown some roots. So I think it's kind of going back to what you were saying, like you can appreciate constraints and also appreciate the freedom that comes with it at the same time. So yes, you would need some friction to appreciate what you do or do not have. So yeah, so going back to what Francesca said to me, like big house, the moment you said big house, I'm sold. I'm like, okay, when can I move in?
You wouldn't be miserable.
Yeah, I would be like, what do you mean? How can you be miserable? Just move from one room to the other. Just, change the color on the walls. I'm like, I don't know how to be miserable in a big house. But yeah, but I suppose it is, if you were so used to it, maybe buy a caravan, like live in the countryside for a year. You would appreciate your big house after that. I suppose if you are in that space, like changing the environment has an effect, doesn't it? So if we were to do this in education, you give them loads of freedom and you will see that they will go like, oh, they don't know what to do with it. But if you give them, oh, you can only do a pencil, they'll be moaning about it as well. So you'll have like complete opposites of it. They'll moan either condition, but in both of those situations, it'll be a different version of it. Like, oh, there's just too many options I don't know what to do with. Or, oh, I'm stuck with this. So it can be either or. But I think both of those situations push creativity, but push it in a different way.
Yeah, I think of it as a muscle somehow. Sorry, go ahead, Alan. You were going to say
No,
something.
you finish, Alison.
Well, I was just thinking about this idea of, how do I build my creative muscle and when do I choose to use constraint as an agitator, versus, when do I give myself the freedom to just experiment in whatever way, shape, or form I might wish to. And I don't think that there is. I think creativity is a very individual, personal thing because I think it comes back to what we were saying before around how do you build confidence in your own process of how you are creative, whether that's your problem solving you're doing on a particular issue, whether it's something you're actually physically creating, a piece of art, a piece of music, whatever, whether it's, looking at something that's happening in society and trying to figure out a systemic change or what have you. So I think it's so personal because to me, it's tied into your own self-belief and your own, maybe this comes back to values system. Like, I feel like I have the license to be creative in pretty much everything I do. Now, I don't always have the confidence to experiment in pretty much everything I do because I view certain things as having an expertise that is, quote, a right and wrong way of doing things. So I'll give you an example. I started learning to ride my horse 5 years ago. I have a horse, etc. Anybody knows anything about horses, this is a lifelong journey. 5 years is nothing, especially compared to the young kids at the barn that have been riding for 10, 15 years. Horses are complicated things, beautiful, fabulous energy, but unpredictable, prey animals, etc., etc. So I don't give myself license to experiment when I am riding my horse, because frankly, I don't want to screw my horse up and I don't want to fall off my horse, which I have done a number of times. And so I turn to the expert and I'm constantly like asking my trainer, well, what about this? What about that? She probably goes crazy with the amount of questions I ask her. And I watch videos and I try and learn from everybody else. And so it's interesting because maybe if I gave myself a little bit more creative license, I could settle into my way of being with my horse and be freer in the way I use my energy with my horse to create a different level of connection. Maybe I could experiment with more groundwork, meaning doing stuff on the ground versus actually getting on him and riding him. So yeah, I think it's just a very personal thing on when are you giving yourself license to be creative? When are you giving yourself license to fail? When are you giving yourself license to do something out of the norm of the, quote, prescribed way of being or doing in a particular situation? Yeah, I don't know.
There's something there about sometimes we focus, and I think somebody mentioned it. Was it you, Alison, that you said you focus too much on the output sometimes?
Yeah, the outcomes, yeah. Versus
yeah. Whereas I'm thinking music now. So imagine a group of musicians that spend their time apart, but practicing routines.
Mm.
When they're brought together, they can be creative together because they're solid on the routines and the basics that they're able to then apply. Whereas those people that just come together and try to play together and do the right thing are going to be far less creative because that's all they know. So there's something about practicing basic sets of skills that you can then feel confident enough to adapt. And then the other thing that came to mind when you're talking about your horse, I think, is this thing about what's the worst that can happen. So I don't blame you for not being too creative when you're riding your horse because you might end up underneath it and nobody wants that to happen, right? Whereas when I'm doing my pencil drawing of that factory or dockyard, what's the worst that can happen? I could have got a C. That would have been the worst. Or I could just rub it out. So, no big deal there. Fascinating.
Yeah, it's an interesting question of consequences, right? How often do we jump into the consequences of something and overplay the potential consequences, overjudge the consequences, versus just sitting in the process of being creative and experimenting. I mean, experimentation is a huge mindset. And what is a life well lived if it's not a life full of experiments? I mean, for me, I'm really trying to get into that space now in this kind of post-corporate world that I'm living in, where I'm just viewing everything I'm getting engaged in as an experiment. I'm not viewing it as, oh, I'm going to do this for the next X years. I'm just viewing it as it's a pure experiment. And if it gives me joy and brings me energy and I feel like it's contributing to the world, then I'll keep doing it. And hopefully that feeds my well-being and my creativity. And if not, then I'll say, okay, that experiment is now closed and let's move on to something else.
You've actually reminded me of an approach that I've I'm using a lot more now when I do work with corporate organizations because I was finding that there was a reluctance to do something. It's like there's always reasons why you shouldn't. And what if it doesn't work as well as we said, and all of this
Yeah.
sort of stuff. So it was by accident that it started. So happy accident, Maddie. Um, and I just said, well, let's just tell everybody it's a pilot. And
Mm.
then all of a sudden they said, oh, okay, that's great. Yeah, let's do that. And how
Yeah.
long's the pilot going to be? You can choose. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
A
Yeah.
good one.
Reframing, right? I mean, we're just reframing.
Yeah, it's using the right word, isn't it? The right terminology that kind of
Yeah.
anchors you slightly. I'm gonna say something like I think you mentioned about learning something, Alan. Like to break a rule, you need to learn it first. You need to learn the skill to break a
Mm.
rule. So if you never knew about the rule of the thirds, you wouldn't know that you're breaking it. So some things I think like when you're talking about music, if you practice enough on some things or those skills, whenever you kind of come together and don't follow it or go the opposite, do something with it, it's another form of creative expression, isn't it?
Mm.
Mm.
And to Alison, your point on the horse, I have fallen multiple times from the horse too. Um, so, I'm going to say, if you don't fall from the horse, you're not going to learn what you did wrong. And also, I think my dad makes this joke. He used to teach me. He's taught me how to ride. And he has this very funny thing. He goes like, "Well, if you're not going to be able to, you have to fall to learn. So you have to make that mistake to
Mm.
correct it. Because if
Mhm.
you've got a smooth sailing situation and then something ever goes wrong, and then you've never experienced failure
Mhm. Mm.
or having a fall,
Mm.
you need to experience that in life. And I think the more you experience it at younger ages, the solider human being you become when you're
Yeah.
older. So
Yeah.
you tend to it ingrains in better.
Yeah.
That used to be
It
his
brings,
philosophy. Every time I'd fall off of a horse, he'd go like, "You're fine, brush it off, you're okay."
well,
I'm,
and it's
I'm still hurting,
resilience.
but
Yeah, it's resilience, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
how do you instill resilience? How do
yeah.
we instill resilience in ourselves, in each other? Um, and yeah, emotional resilience, physical resilience, mental resilience, intellectual resilience. Um, yeah, I mean, would I go so far as to say you cannot be creative unless you have resilience as a sort of uh, a skill that is alongside it? Probably,
Mm.
probably. Um, yeah, because the definition of creating something new and experimenting and embracing failure, etc., means that there will be times that you are very disappointed,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and that you are very frustrated, and that you are very angry, and that you are, just not in a good place. And so the ability to bounce out of that and bring different energy forward is super critical.
Jessica, what about the world of communications? Because it strikes me that communications is supposed to be about creativity, but at the same time, there's so much pressure to get it right. How do the
Yeah.
two sit readily together?
My God, I have no idea because so I do some public relations right now. I mean, that's what I've done. And I'm working with this company right now, and for the life of me, I cannot get them to stop using words that no one understands. Like their corporate speak. I just did a press release from them this morning, and I'm like, can we not say micro, what was it? It was like micro competencies. Can we not? What is that? Like, and I was a former journalist, so I know like the level. I can reduce it all, simmer it down to the level that we all know what a micro competent, whatever it is. But they wouldn't budge, and I'm like, okay, here we go, out it goes. But yeah, it's the whole you're in a communication field and no one communicates. You're in a communication field and it should be creative. Whew, it's so hard to get people to push out of their silos and their all the words they use. And anyway, I don't know, Alan. I'm trying, and it's hard. It's really,
And
really
I'm going to add to that. And I'm going to say, do you know when you get like a branding campaign made and done by somebody else, and then you need to change something, and then you get told by your team, no,
No.
just tell me the proportions of the logo and I'll put it where it needs to be. No, you use the template that's sent to you, but your template isn't adaptable.
Right.
It is those conversations that just go like, I don't know how to do this. So yeah, sometimes the communication field is lax.
If I had a magic wand, this is kind of intense, but I would just, I would unilaterally fire all the no people and all the toxic people, like gone, because you can't do anything, and they're always there saying
There
no.
are, there are. Do you know it's sitting in the back of your head? Do you know when you're actually going to ask the question, you already know the
No,
it's going to be no.
it's awful.
I think that takes us full circle back to, the environment. If the environment is a no environment, then, that's suppressing creativity. It's suppressing the environment we want to create. And yet, if you go back to, well, what's the intent of those people? Their intent is to do the job that they think that they have been or are being paid to do. And somehow they feel that they are the gatekeepers of the brand or the gatekeepers of the logo or the gatekeepers of the essence of the brand. And so they're not doing it because they're trying to make your life difficult. They're doing it because they feel they've been given a mandate to protect something. And yet, maybe it's misplaced protection, who knows? Yeah.
And that goes back to you, Alan, like aligning your values with your output and your behavior, right? Like if it was all in line, you wouldn't have the no, 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 because we all know.
Well, and I think then for me, it's like the question that instead of can I do this? And the answer is no, then if every no person could ask the question, what's the purpose of what you're trying to do? Because I'm inclined to say no, but let's explore what the purpose is. So we go back to, if we take every conversation up to a purpose level, we can get to yes more easily often than if we stay in the content of whatever it is that's causing an issue.
I'm just thinking at the end of this, my dad, if he watches this, he's going to be like, you referred to me a lot in this whole conversation. What was going on? I miss him.
I'm gonna have to send it to him.
Wait.
I really miss him. He used to say, if you can convince me, you can do it.
Mm.
And I think that that's the attitude that you should have. Well, what's your reasoning? Like you just said, Alison. So what's the reasoning? The moment you give a reasoning, and if that reason fits and is solid enough to fit, the answer shouldn't be a no. I should be able to convince you. I think that's what meetings are supposed to be. Now, they're no longer face-to-face, even if they're virtual, that's what they're supposed to be. If I can convince you that this is why I need this to be, I should be able to do it that way. Yeah, so I used to really appreciate, if you can convince me, you can do it. But if you can't convince me, what I just said is what's going to end up happening. Yeah.
In values jams, I'm frequently told, both in guest sessions where it's just two people, but also in group sessions, people say, oh, this thing crossed my mind and I hadn't thought about that for sometimes, multiple decades. And this conversation's got two for me now, and they're both to do with leadership of teams and people. So Maddie, there was my golf director when I was running a hotel and country club. He came forward with the proposal and said, can I do this? And just like you've said, I remember me saying, why do you want to do this? What could possibly go wrong? What are you going to do if that does happen? And we had something like a 45-minute conversation. And at the end of it, there was no way that he couldn't achieve what he had set out to achieve. So that was the first thing. And then the other thing, Alison, I think it's to your point around judgment and success and failure, or perceived success and failure, because the two are often not the same. And when I was running a conference center, we wanted to be regarded as innovative. And so for the business, we started to think about how many initiatives we would put in place for the coming year. And then it occurred to me that if everybody was of the mindset that they had to succeed in these initiatives, perhaps we weren't going to stretch ourselves so much and be as creative as we might otherwise have been. And so this is from probably 25 years ago. I haven't really thought about it for many times since, but we said we are going to complete 6 initiatives in the coming 12 months, 4 of which will be successful, minimum.
Mm-hmm.
So it gave us that kind of wiggle room and
Yep.
allowed people to go for it a bit more. So
Yep.
a bit random to be thinking of those. Right. So I'm going to draw this to a close now, if I may. And there is one final question to answer. So I think it's the 21st of April is World Creativity and Innovation Day. And so I'd like us to consider something very practical that we're going to do. So what are you encouraged to do differently in the space of creativity as a result of this conversation, and which you will be able to do between now and the 21st?
Well, for me, I am going to reinitiate my 10-minute art practice, which I did for 30 days in January because I follow a lady on Substack who did this 30-day challenge, and I'm good at following rules. And then, of course, on day 31, I stopped doing it, and I think about it pretty much every day that I have not found the 10 minutes. And the reason that the 10-minute art practice, which can be anything, it doesn't have to be complicated, can be literally a doodle in your notepad. The reason that that's important to me is because it quietens my brain, it relaxes my body, and it allows me to reconnect with what's important in a sub kind of conscious way. And I know it intellectually, and yet I don't always commit to myself that time. I don't give myself the luxury of it. So I will do that. I've been thinking about it, and now I'm declaring it publicly to the world.
So, Alison, how can we help you set yourself up for success for that? So, when do you think you might start? How are you going to create those 10 minutes? That kind of thing. Any clues around that?
I will start tonight. I will take my notebook to bed with me, which sounds weird, but the last 10 minutes of the day is what I have found to be incredibly relaxing versus doom scrolling on Facebook or Substack or what have you. So put the technology down, pick up the physical notebook, take a pen or a pencil. You've inspired me with the A tool because you don't need anything more than. And that will be my inspiration.
Okay.
This conversation, frankly, is inspiration enough.
And it strikes me, Francesca, that you should follow because Alison, you might not know this, and maybe Francesca can share. She is a bit of a disciplinarian as far as doing something every day at the moment, aren't you, Francesca?
I am. And today is my 100th day. So what I do is I made a New Year's resolution to do something kind every day. And then I post it on LinkedIn, and I have a little Facebook group, Kindness Club. I taught kindness at a university a few years ago, and I'm just really passionate. I'm like a zealot about kindness. And so today is my 100th day, and I'm going to say what I'm doing today is actually reflecting on my 100 days. And I'll say one here, which is I wouldn't be here without my kindness um, initiative because that's how I met Alan through LinkedIn, who saw one of my kindness. And then I connected with Alan. So now I've connected with Values Jams, and it's opened my world too. Like I've had many cool things happen, but this is one of them. So I wouldn't be in my box here if I didn't do my kindness. So
Awesome.
And Francesca, what are you encouraged to do differently, specifically as a result of the conversation today?
okay, I'm announcing mine to the world too. So long story, but I wrote a book. I wrote a book and I've sent it to agent after agent after agent, and I got no, no, no. And then recently I got a maybe. And she said, you just need to do these two things. Okay, she told me that in January. I've worked on this book for 15 years, and she's saying, just do this and this. But I am so overwhelmed by that. I don't know if it's like I'm, can't handle what if it's successful. So I'm committing to making April 21st a day on my calendar right now where I do the two things and send them back to her.
Fabulous.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you. And Maddie,
Coming back to the, I need to read loads of books that are on my shelf. I have been stacking them for some reason. I've been buying them from my favorite bookshop. I need to start reading them. And as much as my kid will not like or appreciate that I'm saying this online, I am going to write in the margins because they're my books. I get to do that.
Yes.
So yeah, so and I highlight them. I highlight most of my books. My side drawer looks like as if I am doing art in my bed. So yeah, so pencils and pens and highlighters. So yeah, so I think the thing that I would do is I've been putting off reading for some time because I keep on going like, oh yeah, I'll do that tomorrow. And I need to do this and I'll do that tomorrow. So when you keep on going like I'll do it tomorrow and that tomorrow just never shows up for some reason. So yeah, I've been doing that for some time. So I have like a lovely list. And so I think I'll start with the book that you mentioned, Your Brain Through Art, is the one that I've been holding on to for some time. And I think I'll start with that one.
when's that going to be, Maddie?
I'm going to start today.
Today.
Yes,
Excellent.
today. My nighttime is not going to be me doodling today because that is what I actually do. I doodle to
Doodle.
bring me calm because I don't sleep much. So when I doodle and I don't doom scroll or I don't do any screens, what it does is it causes my brain to slow down and then allows me to go to sleep. So I do doodling because of that. But I think I could definitely squeeze some reading in there. So
Okay.
So amazing. Doodle.
Mine is a little bit different than the three of yours. So I guess it goes back to that comment about not having a musical bone and not feeling particularly artistic. But recently, when I have conversations with people about things like concepts for logos or artistic design, and when I'm brave enough to make a comment or a suggestion, people have said, "Oh, that's really interesting." Like they're interested in it, and they're not just being polite. I don't think. And so for me, this conversation has really given me a bit more confidence to do that more often and not to hold things back. And just one example today, actually, we were talking about a logo, developing a logo for the fourth dimension. And somebody said, well, if you put the four and the D together, well, you'll have to picture this. So the four and then the D curve is against the long bit of the four, which leaves a space at the bottom left, if you can imagine where the pointy bit of the four is. And I said, well, maybe we could put something in that white space, whether it's a dot or a line or something. And the designer said, that's great. And so, oh, okay. So yeah, I'm going to look out for opportunities to contribute in that way and not kind of feel so unart like. And I'll probably make some mistakes doing that, but that's okay too. So that has been a fantastic values jam on the topic of creativity. It somehow didn't go the place I thought it was going to go. I thought maybe we would talk about very obviously creative things, but I really enjoyed the way that we kind of explored the reasons behind the creativity and the environment and the contributing factors. And last word for Alison, who started us off with the introduction. Alison, any observations or comments from the conversation from you to finish?
Yeah, I would say we are all creative beings, and it's our opportunity to unlock our creativity and see what amazing differences that can make in our personal worlds and the worlds of everybody else around us.
Brilliant. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. And thanks, Francesca and Maddie. Bye now.
Thank you, guys.